You think you know the man sleeping beside you? I did too. Until he shackled my wrists and shoved me into a dirty basement in Mexico. My life was priced at just $500,000. Yet the tarnished silver on my neck was worth an empire. The buyer should have been my nightmare. But upon seeing my pendant, he knelt. That was the moment I realized my ordinary mother was actually a ghost ruling a world I never knew. My name is Layla Foxworth. For most of my 26 years on this earth, I was defined by the quiet hum of servers and the predictable logic of numbers. I was a senior data analyst at Apex Dynamics, a mid-sized firm in downtown Chicago, where the most exciting thing that happened on a Tuesday was the coffee machine breaking down. I lived in a beige apartment, wore sensible shoes, and believed that if you kept your head down and followed the rules, the world would leave you alone. I was the kind of woman who blended into the background, a ghost in the machinery of a bustling city. I liked it that way, or at least, I thought I did, until Julian walked into my life and turned the monochrome into Technicolor. Julian was everything I was not. He was charismatic, spontaneous, and possessed a smile that could disarm a bank robber. He was a consultant, or so he said, a job title vague enough to cover a multitude of absences and specific enough to explain the tailored suits. We had been together for 18 months, a whirlwind of late-night jazz bars and weekends in wine country that felt like a movie montage. I was drowning in him, happily letting the currents of his personality pull me away from my safe, calculated shore. It culminated on a crisp October evening on the rooftop of the London house. The wind off the Chicago River was biting, but I barely felt it. The city was a sprawling grid of amber and white lights below us, a testament to human order, but my heart was beating in a chaotic, wild rhythm. Julian dropped to one knee. The diamond in the velvet box was modest but elegant, catching the ambient light like a trapped star. "Layla," he had said, his voice thick with an emotion I read as devotion, but now recognize as desperation. "Make me the happiest man alive. Leave the spreadsheets behind. Let us build a world that is just ours." I said yes. I said yes, with every fiber of my being, ignoring the tiny, primal alarm bell ringing in the lizard part of my brain that wondered why a man like him would choose a woman like me. I drowned that voice out with champagne and kisses. The plan came together with terrifying speed. Julian insisted on a pre-wedding honeymoon, a celebration of our engagement. He called it. He wanted to take me to Cancun, Mexico, but not just a vacation. He wanted a fresh start. He convinced me to quit my job at Apex. He told me he had just closed a massive deal, enough to support us both while I figured out what I really wanted to do with my life. He painted a picture of sunsets and margaritas, of a life unburdened by the 9-to-5 grind. It was intoxicating. For a girl who had spent her life analyzing risk, I took the biggest gamble of all. I resigned. I packed my life into 2 suitcases. I handed him my heart, wrapped in trust. Before we left, I stood in front of the mirror in my empty apartment, my fingers tracing the silver pendant resting against my collarbone. It was a phoenix, rising from stylized flames, crafted from heavy, tarnished silver that never seemed to shine no matter how much I polished it. It was the only thing my mother, Eleanor, had left me when she died of cancer 4 years ago. Eleanor Foxworth had been a quiet woman, a bookkeeper who lived a life even smaller than mine. She feared loud noises, checked the locks on our doors 3 times every night, and never let me go on school field trips that required crossing state lines. But she was fierce about the necklace. "Never take it off, Layla," she had whispered from her hospital bed, her grip on my hand shockingly strong for someone so frail. "Promise me, it is not just jewelry, it is protection." I had promised, mostly to soothe a dying woman's delirium. I wore it every day, a heavy, cool weight against my skin, a reminder of a mother who loved me with a suffocating, terrified intensity. Looking at it now, I felt a pang of guilt. I was leaving the safety she had curated for me. I was flying into the unknown. But Julian was waiting in the cab downstairs, and the horn honked twice. I tucked the Phoenix inside my blouse, grabbed my purse, and walked out the door. The flight to Cancun was a blur of excitement. Julian was attentive, holding my hand, whispering plans for our future house, perhaps a cottage in Vermont or a flat in London. But the moment the wheels touched the tarmac in Mexico, the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first, like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. We stepped out of the airport into the wall of humidity that hit us like a physical blow. The air smelled of jet fuel and tropical decay. "Hand me your passport and phone." "Honey," Julian said, holding out his hand. "The crowds here can be intense. Pickpockets are everywhere. I will keep them in a safe bag." I hesitated. My phone was my lifeline. My passport was my identity. But his smile was still there, tight at the corners but present. I handed them over. I watched him zip them into his leather satchel, and I felt a strange, cold ripple move through my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid. This was Julian. He loved me. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. There was no driver holding a sign with our names. Julian opened the door and ushered me inside. The interior was freezing, the air conditioning blasting at maximum power. The driver was a silent, thick-necked man who did not look at us. "Where are we going?" I asked as the car peeled away from the airport, bypassing the highway that led to the hotel zone where the glittery resorts lined the turquoise water. "A surprise," Julian said. He was not looking at me. He was texting furiously on his phone, his thumbs moving with a manic speed. A private villa, much more romantic than those crowded tourist traps. We drove for nearly an hour. The scenery changed rapidly. The manicured palm trees and colorful billboards gave way to dense, tangled jungle and dusty roads lined with half-finished concrete structures. We were heading deep into the interior, away from the coast, away from the eyes of the world. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the road. "Julian," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "this feels really far." "Relax, Layla," he snapped. The sharpness of his tone was like a slap. I recoiled, staring at him. He had never raised his voice at me before. He sighed, running a hand through his perfect hair, but he did not apologize. "Just trust me." "Okay, stop asking questions." The SUV turned down a narrow gravel road, kicking up clouds of dust. At the end of the road stood a structure that looked less like a vacation villa and more like a fortress. High concrete walls topped with razor wire surrounded the property. A heavy iron gate blocked the entrance. The driver flashed his headlights 3 times. The gate groaned open, motorized gears grinding in the silence of the dusk. We drove into a courtyard paved with cracked stone. The house itself was beautiful in a brutal, stark way, all sharp angles and dark wood. But the windows were barred. As soon as the SUV stopped, the iron gate behind us began to close. It shut with a final, resonant clang that sounded like a prison sentence. Julian opened his door and got out. He did not come around to open mine. I scrambled out, my legs feeling weak. The heat wrapped around me again, suffocating and heavy. Julian the First called out. He was standing by the trunk, watching the driver unload our bags, but he was not looking at the luggage. He was looking at the main door of the house, where 2 men had just emerged. They were not hotel staff. They wore tactical vests over dark t-shirts, and they carried assault rifles slung casually across their chests. My blood ran cold. The lizard brain that had warned me on the rooftop was now screaming. "Julian, who are these people?" I whispered, reaching for his arm. He pulled away from my touch, as if I were contagious. He turned to face me, and the man I loved was gone. In his place was a stranger with dead, flat eyes. His posture had changed, the slouch of the charming consultant replaced by a rigid tension. "Be quiet." "Layla," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Just shut up and do not make this difficult." The front door opened wider, and a 3rd man stepped out. He was different from the guards. He wore a cream-colored linen suit that remained impeccably crisp despite the humidity. He was older, perhaps in his 50s. with silver hair swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, but it was his eyes that froze the breath in my lungs. They were pale, almost colorless, and they held a cruelty so profound it felt physical. This was a man who did not just kill, he erased. Julian walked towards him, his demeanor shifting instantly from arrogance to subservience. He looked like a dog hoping for a treat. "You are late," the man in the suit said. His voice was smooth, cultured, with a faint accent I could not place. "Traffic," Julian mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But she is here, just like we agreed." The man, whose name I would soon learn was Silas Vane, looked past Julian and fixed his gaze on me. I felt like a butterfly pinned to a board. He walked down the steps, his movements fluid and predatory. He circled me, his eyes scanning my body with a detached, professional appraisal that made me want to vomit. "She looks thinner than the photos," Silas said, sounding disappointed. "She is healthy," Julian interjected quickly, his voice rising in panic. "She is prime. No drugs, no history of disease. I have her medical records in the bag. She is clean." "Silas." I stood there, my mind struggling to process the words. Prime, medical records, clean. They were talking about me as if I were a car, as if I were cattle. "Julian," I choked out, tears blurring my vision. "What is happening? Please, let us just go." Julian laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. "Go. There is no going. Layla, this is the destination." He turned back to Silas. "The price stands $500,000. Silas nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off me. "Depending on the screening, take her inside." The two guards stepped forward, their hands reaching for me. I screamed and scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to go. One of them grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like steel talons. I thrashed, kicking out, but he did not even flinch. He dragged me towards the open door of the villa, towards the darkness that waited inside. I looked back at Julian. He was standing by the car, watching me being hauled away. He was not looking at me with regret. He was checking the lock on his briefcase. Julian the First screamed, my voice raw. "How could you? I love you." He looked up then, and for a second, our eyes met. "Love does not pay the debts. Layla," he said cold and flat, "you were the only asset I had left." The guards shoved me through the doorway, and the heavy wooden door slammed shut. Cutting off the last of the twilight, I was alone in the dark, with monsters in human skin, and the silver phoenix on my chest felt heavier than it ever had before, burning against my skin like a brand. The nightmare had begun, and I had walked right into it with a smile on my face. The heavy wooden door did not just shut. It sealed my fate with a sound that vibrated through the floorboards and into the soles of my feet. The room was stark, illuminated by a single, clinical fluorescent strip that buzzed overhead, casting a pallid, sickly light on everything it touched. I was zip-tied to a heavy steel chair in the center of the room. The plastic bindings bit into my wrists, cutting off circulation until my hands felt like numb. Foreign objects, a strip of thick, industrial-grade duct tape was plastered across my mouth, tasting of acrid adhesive and dust, stifling my screams into pathetic, muffled whimpers. I could only watch. Julian stood 5 feet away from me, the man who had held my hair back when I was sick, the man who had whispered promises of eternity into my skin, was now standing across a metal table from Silas Vane. Between them lay a black velvet cloth, unfolded to reveal a scattering of uncut diamonds and neat stacks of cash. $400,000 in currency, Silas said, his voice devoid of inflection, and the rest in stones, as requested, unmarked, untraceable, easily liquidated in any market from Hong Kong to Zurich. Julian reached out, his hands trembling slightly. It was not the tremble of fear. I realized with a sick jolt of clarity, it was a tremble of anticipation. It was the hunger of an addict staring at a needle. He picked up one of the diamond stacks, holding a stone up to the light. He squinted, his face contorted in a mask of greedy scrutiny. The appraisal says these are VVS. One clarity, Julian muttered, his voice tight. This one looks cloudy. I am not taking garbage. Silas, we agreed on $500,000, $500,000. That was the price for a prime, educated, healthy American female with no criminal record and no immediate family to come looking. Silas leaned back in his chair, a faint, amused smile playing on his lips. He looked at Julian with the same expression one might use for a cockroach that had learned to perform a trick. The stone is flawless, Mr. Sterling, Silas replied smoothly. It is your hand that is shaking. Do not insult my integrity. We are businessmen. Are we not? Businessmen. The word echoed in my skull. I was in the business. Julian dropped the stone back onto the velvet and began counting the cash. His fingers moved with a practiced, terrifying speed. He rifled through the bills, checking the watermarks, his eyes darting back and forth. 100, 200, he was murmuring the numbers under his breath, completely oblivious to my presence. I tried to catch his eye. I wanted him to look at me. I wanted to see a flicker of guilt, of hesitation, something that proved the last 18 months had not been a complete hallucination. I made a sound, a desperate, guttural noise against the tape. Julian paused. He looked up, but not to my eyes. He looked at my chest, checking to see if I was struggling enough to tip the chair over. Seeing that I was secure, he returned to the money. She is making noise, Julian said, sounding annoyed. I thought you said the location was soundproof. It is, Silas assured him. Scream all you want, my dear. The jungle absorbs everything. Julian finished counting. He swept the diamonds and the cash into his leather briefcase, the same one that held my passport and my phone. He clicked the lock shut. Snap, snap, the sound of my life being sold. Why I screamed internally. My mind was racing, trying to find the logic. Was he in trouble? Was he being blackmailed? Has someone threatened him? I tried to construct a scenario where he was the victim, where he was doing this to save me from something worse, as if reading my desperate thoughts. Julian turned to face me. He rested his hand on the briefcase, his posture relaxing for the first time since we landed. He looked tired, but satisfied. Do not look at me like that, Layla, he said. His voice was conversational, as if we were discussing where to order dinner. You are wondering why. You are wondering about the nights in Chicago, the wine, the proposal. He walked closer, stopping just out of kicking range. I owe a lot of money to some very bad people in Macau, he explained. Gambling is a nasty habit, and I'm afraid I am not very good at it. I was drowning. Layla, I had 2 weeks to come up with $500,000 or they were going to start removing my limbs, one by one. He shrugged, a gesture of casual cruelty that shattered my heart more than the violence. I needed an asset, something valuable that I could acquire cheaply and flip for a high profit. And then I met you. You were perfect, solitary, naive, trusting, no father, a dead mother, a job that you could disappear from without raising immediate alarms. You were a blank check waiting to be cashed. Tears streamed down my face, hot and stinging. I shook my head violently. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. It was an investment. Layla, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. Every dinner, every gift, the ring, it was just overhead costs, and the return on investment. He patted the briefcase. $500,000. I just cleared my debts and made a profit. He checked his watch, a Rolex I had bought him for his birthday. My flight leaves in 2 hours. I suggest you cooperate with Mr. Vane. He does not like damaged goods. He turned to leave. He actually turned his back on me. Julian. I tried to scream, the sound tearing at my throat. He paused at the door, his hand on the brass knob. He did not look back. You were too easy, Layla, he said, his voice floating back to me, hollow and distant. You wanted the fairy tale so badly, you never checked to see if the wolf was wearing a suit. Goodbye. The door opened and closed. He was gone. The silence that followed was heavy. filled with the phantom echo of his footsteps walking away from me. Walking away with the price of my life in his hand, I was alone with Silas Vane. The transaction was complete. Now comes the processing. Silas stood up. He was a tall man, looming over me in the small room. He took off his linen jacket and folded it neatly over the back of his chair. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms that were corded with muscle and marked with faint, white scars. He walked around the table and approached me. He did not look at me with lust. That would have been terrifying, but this was worse. He looked at me with the cold, dead eyes of a butcher inspecting a side of beef. "Let us see what we have purchased," he murmured. He grabbed my chin in a grip of iron, forcing my head back. He turned my face to the left, then to the right, examining my profile. He used his thumb to pull down my lower eyelid, checking the whites of my eyes. "Clear," he muttered to himself. "No jaundice. Good." He forced my mouth open against the tape, running a gloved finger along my jawline to check my teeth. I gagged, tasting the latex and the salt of his skin, but I could not pull away. He squeezed my shoulders, testing the muscle tone, then moved his hands down my arms, checking for track marks or scars. He moved behind me. I could hear his breathing, steady and slow. He grabbed my hair, pulling it back to expose my neck. I flinched, expecting a blow, expecting pain. "We need to clean you up," Silas said. "The buyers prefer their acquisitions unadorned. No personal items, no identifiers, and certainly no trackers." He began to remove my accessories. He unclasped the small diamond studs from my ears, tossing them onto the metal table with a tinny clatter. He grabbed my left hand, his fingers slick with sweat, and yanked the engagement ring off my finger. He held it up to the light, chuckling softly. "Fake," he said, "cubic zirconia set in silver plating. Your fiancé was a cheap man. Layla, he sold you for $500,000 but could not spend $500 on a ring." The revelation hit me like a physical punch. Fake. Even the symbol of his promise was a lie. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest, a hysterical, broken sound that died against the tape. Of course it was fake. Everything was fake. I was the only real thing in this equation, and I was the one paying the price. Silas dropped the ring onto the table. It spun for a moment before settling, a worthless piece of glass for a worthless woman. "Now let us get this off," Silas said. His hands moved to my throat. I froze. The phoenix. The silver pendant lay against my sternum, hidden beneath the neckline of my blouse. It was the one thing Julian had not touched, the one thing that was truly mine. It was heavy, warm from my body heat, a grounding weight in a world that had spun off its axis. Silas's fingers brushed against the chain. He hooked a finger under the silver links and pulled. The pendant slid out from my shirt, swinging in the stale air. The moment the tarnished silver caught the fluorescent light, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was instantaneous. Silas did not yank the chain. He did not unclasp it. He stopped. His hand froze in midair, his fingers hovering inches from the metal. The silence that descended was absolute. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to vanish. The jungle sounds outside ceased. The world narrowed down to the space between Silas Vane's hand and the silver bird resting on my chest. I looked up at him, confused through my terror. His face, which had been a mask of bored cruelty just seconds ago, had gone slack. His eyes were wide, fixed on the pendant with an intensity that bordered on madness. His breath hitched in his throat, a sharp, ragged sound. He slowly, very slowly, reached out again. His hand was trembling. Not the greedy tremble of Julian, but a tremor of genuine, primal shock. He touched the wing of the phoenix with the tip of his index finger. The metal was old, darkened by time, the details of the feathers worn smooth by years of my mother's fingers rubbing it, and then mine. But the shape was unmistakable. A bird rising from the fire, its wings spread in a defiant V, its beak open in a silent scream of resurrection. Silas pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. He stumbled a step backward, his boots scraping loudly against the concrete floor. He looked from the necklace to my face, and for the first time, he really saw me. He did not see a product. He did not see a victim. He saw something else, something that terrified him. The color drained from his face, leaving him a grayish, ashen hue. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively. Where did you get this?" he whispered. His voice was unrecognizable. The smooth, cultured baritone was gone, replaced by a rasp of pure fear. I stared at him, my heart pounding against my ribs. I could not answer. The tape was still over my mouth. He seemed to realize this. He lunged forward, his movements frantic and clumsy. He did not rip the tape off. He peeled it away with a strange, terrified gentleness, his hands shaking so hard he nearly gouged my cheek with his fingernail. The tape came free with a stinging tear. I gasped, sucking in a lungful of air, coughing as my dry throat protested. "Answer me," Silas roared, his panic spiking. He grabbed the arms of my chair, leaning into my face. His eyes were wild, darting between my eyes and the necklace. "Where did you get that pendant?" I coughed again, tasting blood where my teeth had cut my lip. I looked at him, bewildered by this sudden shift in power dynamics. Why was he afraid of a piece of old silver? "My mother," I croaked, my voice raw and broken. It was my mother's. Silas froze again. He looked like a man who had just heard the tolling of his own funeral bell. He backed away slowly, shaking his head in denial. "No," he muttered. "Impossible. She is dead. She has been dead for 20 years. That crest is buried." He looked at me again, searching my features, looking for ghosts in the architecture of my face. "What is your name?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Your real name, not the one on the passport. Who is your mother?" I did not understand. I was Layla Foxworth. I had always been Layla Foxworth, but the fear in his eyes was contagious. It made the hair on the back of my arms stand up. "I am Layla," I whispered. "And my mother. My mother was Eleanor Foxworth." The name hung in the air like an incantation. Silas Vane, the cold-blooded trafficker, the man who inspected humans like cattle, did something I never expected to see. His knees gave way. He collapsed onto the concrete floor, not in a faint, but in a posture of abject surrender. He looked up at me, and the horror in his eyes was absolute. "Foxworth," he breathed, the words sounding like a curse and a prayer all at once. "Eleanor." He looked at the pendant again, and then at me. "You are not merchandise," he whispered, his voice trembling with the realization of a fatal error. "You are the daughter of the sovereign." He scrambled backward on his hands and knees, putting distance between us, as if I were radioactive. He looked at the door Julian had just walked out of, then back at me. "God help us," he murmured, wiping a hand over his face. "We just sold the devil's daughter." I sat there, bound to the chair, the cheap plastic cutting into my wrists, the taste of betrayal still bitter in my mouth. But as I looked at the man cowering on the floor before me, I realized that the nightmare had shifted. I was no longer just a victim. I was something else, something dangerous, and I had no idea why. The silver phoenix burned against my skin, warm and heavy, a silent witness to the truth that was about to tear my world apart. The silence in the concrete room was shattered not by a scream, but by the frantic, chaotic shuffling of boots, the 2 guards who had dragged me in. Men with faces carved from apathy and violence were suddenly animated by confusion. They saw their leader, the unflappable Silas Vane, crumpled on the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. Their instincts, honed in the brutal hierarchy of the cartel, misinterpreted the scene entirely. They assumed I was the threat. Weapon one of them barked, a guttural sound that bounced off the damp walls. I heard the distinct, terrifying click of safety catches being disengaged. 2 assault rifles were raised, the black barrels pointing directly at my chest. I flinched, squeezing my eyes shut, bracing for the impact of bullets that would tear through the thin fabric of my blouse and end my life before I even understood what was happening. No, Silas roared. The sound was animalistic, a desperate command that tore from his throat with enough force to spray spittle across the floor. He scrambled up from his knees. Placing his own body between the gunman and me, he threw his arms out wide, making himself a human shield. "Do not shoot," he screamed, his voice cracking. "If you scratch her, I will skin you both alive. Lower your weapons. Lower them now." The guards hesitated, exchanging bewildered glances. They had likely seen Silas execute men for sneezing at the wrong time, yet here he was, protecting the merchandise he had just purchased. Slowly, warily, they lowered the muzzles of their rifles, though their fingers hovered near the triggers. "Cut her loose," Silas commanded, his chest heaving. The guards blinked. "Boss." "Cut her loose," Silas bellowed, his face turning a dark, Venus purple. "Get the knife. Cut the ties. Now. And be careful. If you break the skin, you die." One of the guards pulled a serrated combat knife from his belt and approached me. I pressed myself back against the hard metal of the chair, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was terrified of the blade, but I was even more terrified of the man ordering it. The shift in dynamic was too sudden, too violent. It felt like the air pressure in the room had dropped, signaling an incoming tornado. The guard moved behind me. I felt the cold steel slide between my wrist and the thick plastic zip tie. There was a sharp tug, a snapping sound, and then my hands fell into my lap, heavy and useless. The rush of blood returning to my fingers was agonizing, a cascade of pins and needles that made me gasp. "Get up," Silas whispered. He was not looking at the guards anymore. He was looking at the floor. His head bowed, as if he were unworthy to look me in the eye. "Please, stand up." I pushed myself up on shaky legs, my knees buckled, and I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. The room spun. I looked at Silas, this man who had stripped me of my dignity just minutes ago, now trembling like a leaf in a gale. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice raspy. "What is this? What is the sovereign?" Silas took a deep breath, composing himself. He waved a hand at the guards, a gesture of dismissal that was absolute. "Leave us," he said. "Stand guard outside the main gate. Let no one in, not even the cartel lieutenants. If anyone approaches this room, kill them." "But the boss," the guard started. "Go," Silas snarled. The men scrambled out of the room, the heavy door booming shut behind them. We were alone again, but the predator was gone. In his place stood a man haunted by a ghost. Silas turned to the metal table, picked up the chair I had been tied to, and moved it away. He then pulled out his own leather chair and gestured for me to sit. It was an offer, not a command. "Please," he said. I remained standing, clutching the table. I was not going to sit. I needed to be ready to run, even if there was nowhere to run to. "Tell me," I demanded, clutching the silver phoenix pendant that still hung around my neck. "You saw this and you fell apart. Why?" Silas looked at the pendant, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and terror. "That is not just jewelry." "Miss Foxworth," he said softly, "that is a seal, a badge of office. In the underworld, there are gangs, there are cartels, and there are syndicates. They fight for territory, for drugs, for money. They are loud, they are violent, they are temporary." He took a step closer, but stopped when I flinched. He held his hands up, showing me his palms. "But above them," he continued, his voice dropping to a reverent hush, "there is the sovereign. They do not fight for corners. They do not deal in kilos. They deal with governments. They deal in economies. They are the architects of the unseen world. They keep the balance. They ensure that the chaos of the criminal world does not spill over and destroy the civil world." I shook my head, a laugh of disbelief bubbling up in my throat. This was insane. This was a bad movie plot. "My mother was a bookkeeper," I said, my voice rising. "She worked for a logistics company. She clipped coupons. She drove a 10-year-old sedan. She died of pancreatic cancer in a hospice in Chicago. She was not a crime lord. Silas smiled, a sad, knowing smile. Eleanor Foxworth was the best, he said, the Ghost Queen. That is what they called her in the Whisper networks. She vanished 20 years ago. The world thought she had been assassinated during the Night of Long Knives in Berlin, but she had not died. She had retired. She took the ultimate exit strategy. She became normal. He pointed a shaking finger at the pendant. Only 3 of those were ever cast, he said. 1 for the founder, 1 for the enforcer, and 1 for the architect. Your mother was the architect. She built the systems that run the black markets of 3 continents, every shipping route, every money laundering algorithm, every safe harbor protocol. She designed them. My mind flashed back to the nights at our kitchen table. Mom, surrounded by stacks of paper, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Working late into the night, I always thought she was balancing the books for the trucking company she worked for. Mom, why are there so many numbers? I had asked once when I was 10. Because numbers tell the truth. Layla, she had replied, marking a ledger with a red pen. People lie. Numbers do not. If you control the numbers, you control the outcome. I felt the blood drain from my face. I was a data analyst. I had spent my life looking for patterns in data. Had she guided me there? Had she been training me without me even knowing it? Silas was watching me process this, his expression softening. You have her eyes, he said quietly. I should have seen it. But I was blinded by the context. Who expects to find the daughter of the architect being sold by a 2-bit gambler for $500,000? It is like finding a nuclear warhead at a yard sale. He took a deep breath and then, to my utter shock, he began to unbutton his linen shirt. What are you doing? I asked, stepping back. I need to show you something, he said. He pulled the shirt open, revealing a chest that was a map of scar tissue, bullet wounds, knife slashes, burns. But right over his heart, there was a tattoo. It was faded, the ink bleeding into the aging skin, but the image was clear. It was a small, black shield, and inside the shield was a stylized feather, a phoenix feather. 25 years ago, Silas said, buttoning his shirt back up, I was a nobody, a street runner in the favelas of Rio. I stole a briefcase I should not have touched. It belonged to the sovereign. The local cartel caught me. They were going to skin me alive in the public square as a warning. They had me tied up. The knife was at my throat. He paused, his eyes distant, seeing a memory that was clearly etched into his soul. Then she walked in. Eleanor. She did not bring an army. She walked in alone, wearing a gray business suit and holding a parasol against the sun. She spoke to the cartel boss for 2 minutes. I do not know what she said. But 2 minutes later, the boss cut me down himself and apologized to her. She looked at me, a bleeding, terrified kid, and she gave me a choice. She said I could go back to the gutter, or I could serve a higher purpose. Silas looked at me, his eyes wet. She saved my life, Layla. She gave me a name. She gave me an education. She put me in this position. I owe her every breath I take. I owe her the blood in my veins. And I just bought her daughter like a piece of meat. He dropped to his knees again, burying his face in his hands. If the council finds out I touched you, he muffled through his palms, they will not just kill me. They will erase my entire bloodline. The room spun. The pieces of the puzzle were slamming together with violent force. The sudden school transfers whenever I was bullied. The time a creepy neighbor disappeared overnight. The fact that we never had much money. Yet I went to the best universities on anonymous scholarships. She had been protecting me. She had built a fortress of mediocrity around us to hide me from her past. And I, in my stupidity, in my desperate need for love, had let Julian lure me right out of the gates. Julian, I whispered. The name tasted like ash. Julian does not know. No, Silas said, looking up. He thinks you are nobody. He thinks he won. Silas stood up, his demeanor hardening. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by a steely resolve. He walked over to a panel on the wall and punched in a code. A hidden compartment slid open, revealing a row of high-tech earpieces and a sleek black handgun. He took an earpiece and put it in. He tapped it twice. Team Alpha, Team Bravo, converge on the main house. Code red. I repeat, code red. The guest is not a guest. The guest is VIP1. Initiate protocol, Phoenix. He turned to me. Miss Foxworth, he said, his voice formal, almost military. I cannot undo the insult I have offered you today. I will accept my punishment for that later. But right now, my duty is to secure your safety. You are now under the protection of the Vane Syndicate, acting as a proxy for the Sovereign. He walked to the heavy door and threw it open. Outside, the courtyard was a hive of activity. The two guards from before were standing at rigid attention, but they were not alone. A dozen other men, heavily armed, were lining up. As Silas stepped out with me, he barked a single command in Spanish. Rodillas. The sound of 12 men dropping to their knees in unison was like a thunderclap. Dust billowed up around their boots. They bowed their heads, their weapons placed on the ground in front of them in a gesture of submission. They did not know who I was. They only knew that their boss, the terrifying Silas Vane, was bowing to me. Silas stepped aside, gesturing for me to look at them. They are yours, he said. My life is yours. What is your command? I stood on the threshold of the villa, the humid Mexican air sticking to my skin. I looked at the men kneeling in the dirt. I looked at the jungle beyond the walls, and I thought of Julian, who was probably sitting in first class right now, sipping champagne, counting his money, laughing at how easy it had been to dispose of me. He had sold me to a monster, but he had forgotten to check if the monster had a master. I reached up and touched the Phoenix pendant. The metal felt hot, pulsing with a strange energy. I felt a shift inside me. The terrified girl who had cried in the car was receding. In her place, something cold and hard was beginning to form. It was the part of me that was my mother's daughter. I looked at Silas. Get me a phone, I said. My voice was steady. It did not tremble. And find out where Julian is landing. Silas nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. It shall be done, mistress. I walked out into the courtyard, past the kneeling men. I did not look down. I looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Mom, I whispered to the empty air, you have a lot of explaining to do. But first, I have a wedding to crash. The transformation had begun. Layla, the victim, was dead. The Phoenix was waking up, and she was hungry. The transition from the sweltering courtyard to the interior of the villa was jarring. Silas led me not back to the cell where I had been bound, but through a maze of corridors that smelled of old cedar and lemon polish. He stopped before a heavy tapestry depicting a hunting scene, reached behind it, and pressed a hidden sensor. With a pneumatic hiss that sounded out of place in such a rustic setting, a section of the stone wall slid backward and sideways, revealing a steel elevator door. After you, mistress, Silas said, his head bowed low. We descended into the earth. The air here was scrubbed clean, recycled and cool, humming with the low frequency of server banks. When the doors opened, I stepped into a room that looked like the bridge of a spaceship or a high-end situation room at the Pentagon. Walls of monitors displayed live feeds of shipping lanes, stock tickers, and satellite views of cities I could not name. This, Silas said, sweeping his hand across the room, is one of the 12 nodes of the Sovereign. Your mother built this network. She called it the Spider's Web. I walked toward the nearest screen, my legs feeling heavy, as if gravity were pulling harder on me than on anyone else. On the screen, streams of data cascaded like waterfalls. I recognized the code structures. It was efficient, brutal, and elegant. It was the same logic I had seen in the grocery lists my mother used to write, organized by aisle and price per ounce. The banality of my memories clashed violently with the reality before me. Sit, please, Silas said, pulling out a chair made of black leather and chrome. We have much to discuss, and I fear the truth will be harder to digest than the lies. I felt numb, a kind of emotional anesthesia that sets in when the brain simply cannot process any more trauma. You said she was the architect, I said, my voice sounding hollow in the acoustic-dampened room, but she was poor. Silas. We clipped coupons for cereal. We drove a car that rattled when it went over 40 miles per hour. We lived in a 2-bedroom walk-up in a neighborhood that was just on the safe side of dangerous. Silas tapped a command into the console desk. A large screen on the wall flickered and changed. It displayed a timeline, stretching back 30 years. Wealth is a spotlight, Silas said softly. Your mother knew that to be truly safe, one must be invisible. The poverty was a costume. Layla? It was the most expensive costume she ever bought. He pointed to a section of the timeline dated 14 years ago. Do you remember the chaotic year you transferred to Wickersham Academy? I nodded slowly. I was 12. I had been attending a public school that was underfunded and overcrowded. Then, one day, Mom came home with a letter. She said I had won a lottery scholarship to Wickersham, the most exclusive private school in Illinois. I thought I was lucky, I whispered. There is no luck in the sovereign's world, Silas corrected gently. There was no lottery. Wickersham had a board member who was laundering money through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Your mother found out. She did not blackmail him for money. She traded his silence for your admission. She bought your education with a secret. My mind raced back to the marble halls of that school, the uniforms that cost more than our monthly rent. I had felt like an imposter every single day, working twice as hard to prove I belonged. All the while, my mother had owned the man who signed my report cards. And the bullies I asked, a specific memory surfacing, there was a boy, Brandon Miller. He made my sophomore year a living hell. He put gum in my hair, stole my books, called me trash in front of the entire cafeteria. And then Silas prompted, and then? He moved. I said, the realization dawning on me like a cold sunrise. Mid-semester, he just vanished. The rumors were that his father got transferred to a branch in Tokyo. Silas typed a name into the console. A file appeared. James Miller, father of Brandon. He did not get transferred. His company was acquired in a hostile takeover orchestrated by a shell corporation owned by Eleanor Foxworth. As the new owner, she reassigned him to a post in rural Alaska, not Tokyo. She uprooted an entire family because his son pulled your pigtails. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry. I had always seen my mother as a fragile bird, a woman who flinched at thunder, but she had been a titan, moving people across the chessboard of the world just to clear the path for my feet. Why, I asked, tears pricking my eyes. Why hide it? Why let me believe we were nothing? Because of the inheritance, Silas said. He pointed to the pendant around my neck. I looked down at the silver phoenix. It looked so innocent, so tarnished and cheap. That is not silver, Silas explained. It is a composite alloy made from a meteorite blend that does not exist on the periodic table. It is a physical key. It contains a passive RFID chip with a quantum encryption signature. He looked me dead in the eye. That necklace is the master key to the sovereign's treasury. It opens accounts in Zurich that have been dormant for 4 years. It unlocks safe houses in 12 countries. It grants the bearer the authority to command the network. It is a crown. Layla, and you have been wearing it to buy coffee and file spreadsheets. I grabbed the pendant, the metal suddenly feeling searing hot against my palm. She told me it was a family heirloom. I stammered. She made me promise never to take it off. Because if you took it off, you lost your protection, Silas said. And if you wore it, you were hiding it in plain sight. Who looks for the keys to the kingdom around the neck of a girl flying economy class? But she died. I insisted, the grief crashing into me. I watched her die. Silas, I was there in the hospice. I saw the cancer eat her away. I held her hand when the monitor flattened. You cannot fake that. I saw the body. Silas looked away, his jaw tightening. This was the part he had been dreading. The human body is a biological machine, he said quietly. With the right combination of pharmaceuticals, you can slow the heart rate to 2 beats per minute. You can induce pallor, weight loss, and organ failure symptoms that mimic late-stage pancreatic cancer perfectly. I stood up, the chair scraping violently against the floor. "Are you telling me," I hissed, my voice trembling with a rage I had never felt before, "that my mother is alive?" Silas hesitated. "I am telling you that Eleanor Foxworth did not die in that hospice bed 4 years ago," he said carefully. "She staged her exit. Her enemies were closing in. The Sovereign was fracturing. A faction known as the Viper's Nest was hunting her. To save you, she had to cease to exist. She had to die so that the hunt would stop. So she left me," I said, the words tasting like poison. "She let me mourn her. She let me cry myself to sleep for 2 years. She let me feel completely and utterly alone in this world. So she could—" "What retires?" "So she could keep you out of the crossfire," Silas shouted, losing his composure for a split second. "If they knew she was alive, they would have taken you to get to her. By dying, she made you irrelevant. She made you a nobody. She placed you in a glass cage of anonymity where you were safe." I sank back into the chair, burying my face in my hands. The betrayal was a physical pain, a knife twisting in my gut. I had grieved for a ghost. I had built a shrine to a lie. All my life, I thought I was loved, but I was just managed. I was a project, a protected asset. And then came Julian. I whispered, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Silas nodded grimly. Julian Sterling, the variable she did not account for. The fool who walked into the Louvre and tried to use the Mona Lisa as a placemat. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Julian broke the glass cage. "Layla, he took you out of the safety zone. When he brought you here, when he tried to sell you to the underworld, he did not just commit a crime. He declared war. He took the dormant heir of the Sovereign and put her on the auction block." I looked up at the screens, at the flowing data, at the empire my mother had built with blood and silence. I thought about Julian, about the way he had looked at me with such contempt. Calling me easy and naive, he was right. I had been naive. I had believed in the surface of things. I had believed in love, in poverty, in grief. But the surface was gone now. The glass was shattered. Silas stood up and walked over to a metal cabinet. He opened it and pulled out a sleek black case. He set it on the table in front of me and opened it. Inside lay a passport with a new name, a stack of cash, and a plane ticket to New Zealand. "Protocol requires me to offer you this," Silas said formally. "The vanish option. New face, new history. A quiet life on a sheep farm at the edge of the world. You can disappear for real this time. Julian will never find you. The Sovereign will never find you. You can be safe." I looked at the ticket. It represented everything I had been raised to be quiet. Safe, hidden. It was the path my mother had chosen for me. Then I looked at the reflection in the black monitor. I saw a woman with messy hair, a torn blouse, and eyes that were red from crying. But I also saw the phoenix resting against her collarbone. "My mother lied to me," I said, my voice steadying. "She manipulated me. She treated me like a pawn to be protected. She decided what my life should be without ever asking me." I reached out and closed the case with a sharp snap. "I am done being a pawn, Silas, and I am done being a victim." Silas watched me, his breath held. "What are you saying, mistress?" I stood up and walked to the main console. I placed my hand on the smooth, cold surface of the desk. "Julian sold me for $500,000. I said, "He thinks I am a resource to be exploited. My mother thought I was a child to be hidden. Both of them underestimated me." I turned to Silas, and I felt a cold fire ignite in my chest. It was not the warmth of the old Layla. It was the freezing burn of liquid nitrogen. "I do not want to go to New Zealand," I said. "I want to go to the source. I want to access the accounts. I want to activate the network." Silas's eyes widened. "You want to claim the seat?" he asked. His voice hushed. "That is a declaration of existence. The Viper's Nest will come for you. The other syndicates will test you. It is a death sentence for the weak." I touch the phoenix one last time. Then it is a good thing I am already dead. Isn't it Layla Foxworth, the data analyst, died in that basement? I looked at the map on the screen, at the blinking lights of the world my mother had conquered. Julian wanted to sell an empire, I said, a cruel smile touching my lips. Let us show him what happens when the empire wakes up and screams back. Silas stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, a look of profound respect replaced the fear in his eyes. He straightened his back and clicked his heels together. The network awaits your biometric confirmation, he said. I stepped forward. I was no longer the girl who cried over a broken engagement. I was the daughter of the ghost, and I was about to haunt the man who betrayed me. Trace the transfer, I said. My voice was no longer the tentative question of a fiancé. It was the command of an executive issuing a liquidation order. Silas did not hesitate. His fingers flew across the haptic interface of the console table. The screen in front of us shifted from global maps to a specific stream of financial data. The Cayman Islands account you provided was a routing shell. Silas explained, his tone clinical. Standard amateur laundering. It took the system less than 30 seconds to pierce the veil. The funds were immediately bounced to a holding entity in Nevada. Nevada, I repeated, watching the red line on the map snake across the continent. Of course. He is predictable, Silas muttered. He has cashed out at the Emerald Sands Casino in Las Vegas. He is currently listed as a VIP guest in the Emperor's Suite. I stared at the blinking dot on the screen. It represented Julian. At this very moment, he was likely ordering bottle service, toasting to his own brilliance. Believing he had successfully converted his girlfriend into a debt-free future, he thought he was untouchable. He thought the girl he left in the Mexican jungle would vanish into the dark, a silent statistic that would never resurface. Prepare the jet, Silas, I said, turning away from the screen, and call the contacts you mentioned, the ones holding his debt notes in Macau. Tell them their payment is not coming. Tell them the debtor is trying to flee. Silas raised an eyebrow, a flicker of dark appreciation crossing his face. You want to serve him up to the triads. I walked toward the elevator, the heels of my boots clicking a sharp, rhythmic cadence on the metal floor. I wanted to give him exactly what he wanted. I said cold and flat. He wanted a transaction. I am just facilitating the closing deal. 5 hours later, the air in Las Vegas was dry and electric, smelling of ozone and desperation. We did not enter the Emerald Sands through the front door like tourists. Silas's team, a phalanx of men in dark suits who moved with the synchronized lethality of a wolf pack, secured the service entrance. We moved through the bowels of the casino, past the kitchens and the security rooms. Silas had already compromised the casino's surveillance system. To the security guards watching the monitors, we were invisible, a looping feed of an empty hallway masking our approach. We took the private elevator up to the high-limit lounge. As the numbers on the display climbed, I adjusted the cuffs of the suit Silas had procured for me. It was not the soft, floral sundresses Julian used to like. It was a structured, midnight black power suit with a plunging neckline and sharp shoulders, tailored to look like armor. My hair was slicked back, severe and exposing my face. I wore no makeup to hide the bruising on my wrists or the cut on my lip. I wanted him to see the damage. I wanted him to see the receipt. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. The high-limit lounge was a world of gold leaf, velvet, and hushed murmurs. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto green felt tables where fortunes were won and lost in the turn of a card. And there, in the center of the room, holding court at a private baccarat table, was Julian. He looked radiant. He was wearing a fresh tuxedo, a glass of amber liquid in one hand, a lit cigar in the other. He was laughing at something the dealer had said, his head thrown back, his teeth flashing white. He looked like a man without a care in the world. A stack of high-value chips sat in front of him, a tower of plastic that represented my life. I stepped out of the elevator. Silas and 4 of his men flanked me, forming a wedge that cut through the room. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The ambient noise of the casino floor seemed to be sucked out of the room. People stopped talking. Waitresses froze with trays of drinks in their hands. The aura of violence radiating from Silas's team was palpable, a physical weight that pressed down on everyone present. Julian, sensing the silence, turned around. The smile on his face froze. It did not fade. It simply petrified, turning into a rictus of confusion that slowly, agonizingly, crumbled into horror. The glass of scotch slipped from his fingers. It hit the plush carpet with a dull thud, splashing expensive liquor onto his patent leather shoes. But he did not notice. "Layla," he whispered. The name was a question, a prayer, and a curse all at once. He blinked, rubbing his eyes as if trying to clear a hallucination. "Hello, Julian," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the silence of the room, it carried like a gunshot. He stumbled backward, knocking over his stack of chips. They clattered to the floor, rolling in every direction. "No," he stammered, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax figure. "This is impossible. You are in Mexico. You are gone." I walked closer, my eyes locked on him. I felt absolutely nothing. No love, no hate. Just a cold, clinical observation of a pest that needed to be exterminated. The transaction was declined. "Julian," I said, stopping 5 feet from him. The merchandise was defective. It had teeth. Julian looked past me to Silas. He recognized the man immediately. His eyes bulged. "Mr. Vane," Julian squeaked. "What is this? Why is she here? I thought we had a deal. I gave you the girl." Silas stepped forward, his face a mask of stone. "You sold me the sovereign's daughter. You imbecile," Silas rumbled, his voice vibrating with suppressed rage. "You sold me my own queen." Julian looked between us, his brain misfiring as it tried to process the impossible. "Sovereign queen," he shook his head frantically. "She is a data analyst," he screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. "She is a nobody. She clips coupons. Layla, tell them who you are." I pulled out my phone. With a single tap, I executed the command Silas had set up. "Look up, Julian," I said. Every digital display in the lounge, the massive flat screens showing sports, the ticker tapes showing stock prices, even the small screens on the slot machines blinked out. A second later, they all flickered back to life with the same video feed. It was footage from the basement in Mexico. The entire room watched in stunned silence. On the giant screen above the bar, granular but clear, was Julian. He was sweating, his eyes greedy. The audio boomed through the casino speakers. "She is prime, no drugs, no history of disease. 500,000, that was the price." The crowd in the lounge gasped. Wealthy matrons covered their mouths. Men in suits looked at Julian with undisguised disgust. It was one thing to be a criminal. It was another to be a man who sold his fiancée like cattle. He was being stripped naked in front of the very people he desperately wanted to impress. Julian spun around, looking at the screens, his hands clawing at the air as if he could pull the images down. "Turn it off," he shrieked. "That is deepfake. That is not real." I tapped my phone again. "And this," I said, "is the refund." Julian's phone buzzed in his pocket, then it buzzed again, and again, a rapid-fire staccato of notifications. He pulled it out with trembling hands. He stared at the screen, his knees beginning to shake. "My money," he whispered. "Where is my money?" "I accessed your offshore accounts, Julian," I said calmly. "The $500,000 you got for me, gone. The remaining funds you had stashed away, gone. Even the balance on your credit cards, I wiped it all." I took a step closer, invading his personal space. "You are at zero. Julian, actually, you are far below zero, because you forgot about the other debt." Julian looked up, sweat pouring down his face. "The Macau debt," he choked out. I nodded. "I called them," I said. "I told them you were here. I told them you had come into some money but were planning to skip town without paying them." Julian's head whipped around toward the entrance of the lounge. 3 men were walking in. They did not look like security guards. They wore ill-fitting suits and had the hard, weathered faces of men who worked with bone saws and pliers. They were the collectors for the Golden Dragon Syndicate. They pushed past the casino security as if they didn't exist. Julian let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He lunged toward me, grabbing the lapels of my jacket. "Layla, please," he begged, spittle flying from his lips. "You cannot let them take me. They will kill me. They will cut me apart. I am sorry, I will do anything. We can start over. I love you." Silas moved faster than I could track. He struck Julian in the solar plexus, a short, controlled blow that folded him in half. Julian collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, clutching his stomach. "Do not touch her," Silas snarled. I looked down at the man kneeling at my feet. 18 months of memories, dinners, walks, laughter. The proposal flashed through my mind. I waited for a pang of sympathy. I waited to feel sorry for him. But there was only silence. He was a stranger. "You do not love me, Julian," I said softly. "You never did. You loved the idea of a safety net." Well, I removed the net. I looked at the 3 men from Macau. They had stopped a respectful distance away, waiting for my signal. They knew who Silas was. They knew the hierarchy. "He is all yours," I said to them. The collectors moved in. They grabbed Julian by the arms and hauled him up. He began to scream, a high-pitched, wailing sound that grated on the ears. "Layla. Layla, help me. Look at the pendant. Remember your mother? She would not do this." I reached up and touched the silver phoenix. "You are right," I said, my voice cold as the grave. "My mother would have killed you herself. I am being merciful. I am letting you live long enough to pay your debts." The collectors dragged him backward. He dug his heels into the carpet, knocking over chairs, his fingernails leaving grooves in the velvet upholstery. "Layla, no." His screams echoed down the hallway as they dragged him toward the service elevator. The casino guests watched in horrified fascination. But no one moved to help him, in this world. When the sharks come, the minnows scatter. I stood there, watching him disappear. The man who had been my world was gone, reduced to a problem that had been solved. Silas stepped up beside me. He offered me a handkerchief. I realized my hands were shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. "It is done," Mr. Silas said quietly. I wiped a speck of dust from my lapel. I did not take the handkerchief. I did not need to wipe away tears. "Not yet," I said, turning my back on the empty elevator. This was just the cleanup. The real mess is still waiting for us in New York. I surveyed the room. The patrons were staring at me with a mixture of fear and awe. They didn't know my name, but they knew power when they saw it. I straightened my spine, feeling the weight of the phoenix against my heart. "Let us go." "Silas," I commanded, "I have a house to clean." We walked out of the emerald sands, leaving the chaos behind us. I stepped out into the Las Vegas night, the neon lights reflecting in my eyes. I felt lighter. The final shackle of my old life had been broken. Julian was the past, the sovereign was the future, and I was ready to rule. New York City looked exactly the same as it had when I left. Yet it felt like I was looking at it through a different lens. The chaos of Manhattan, the screaming sirens, the endless rush of yellow taxis, it all seemed trivial now. I sat in the back of the armored town car Silas had arranged, watching the city blur past. I was not returning as Layla, the data analyst who rented a studio in Chicago. I was returning as the heir to a ghost. Our destination was a limestone townhouse on the Upper East Side. To the public, it was the residence of a reclusive philanthropist. In reality, it was one of the primary safe houses my mother had established in the United States. It was the nerve center of the Foxworth legacy on the East Coast. The car pulled up to the curb, and the heavy iron gate swung open. I stepped out, flanked by Silas and 2 of his new guards. My heart did a strange, painful flip when the front door opened. Arthur was standing there. Arthur, with his pristine white gloves, his slightly stooped shoulders, and that expression of perpetual, kindly worry that had defined my childhood summers. He was the man who had taught me how to tie my shoes. He was the man who had snuck me extra chocolate cake when my mother was on a health kick. He was the legal guardian who had signed my college tuition checks from the trust fund. "Layla," he cried out, his voice cracking with emotion. He shuffled down the steps, disregarding his usual stiff propriety, and pulled me into a hug that smelled of lavender and old paper. "Oh, thank heavens," he murmured into my hair. "When Silas contacted me, when I heard what that monster Julian had done, I thought I had lost you. I thought I had failed Eleanor." I hugged him back, burying my face in his woolen cardigan. For a second, I let myself be the little girl again. I let myself feel safe. "I am okay. Arthur," I whispered, "I am home." But even as I said the words, a cold sliver of ice pricked the back of my neck. It was the new instinct I had awakened in the jungle, the paranoia that Silas called survival. We moved into the library, a room lined with mahogany bookshelves that reached the ceiling. Arthur fussed over me, pouring tea, offering biscuits, asking a dozen questions about my health. "You must rest," he insisted, his hands fluttering. "The master bedroom is prepared. I have had security tripled. No one can get to you here. You are safe, my dear." I nodded, sipping the tea. It was Earl Grey, my favorite. He remembered. "Thank you." "Arthur," I said, "but I'm not tired. I have work to do. Silas tells me this house connects to the central server." Arthur hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something unreadable passed behind his wire-rimmed glasses before the kindly mask slipped back into place. "Of course," he said, "but surely it can wait until morning. You have been through a terrible ordeal." "It cannot wait," I said firmly. "I need to understand the finances. I need to know what resources we have to fight back." I walked over to the desk, the heavy oak piece where my mother used to sit during her rare visits. I booted up the terminal. It recognized my biometric signature, or rather, the signature of the phoenix pendant I was wearing. As Arthur retreated to the kitchen to prepare dinner, I began to dig. But I was not looking for financial records. I was looking for answers to a question that had been gnawing at me since I left the casino. Julian was a gambler. He was impulsive, reckless, and not particularly bright. He was a man who lived paycheck to paycheck, drowning in debt. How did a man like that plan a kidnapping that bypassed the sovereign's passive security protocols? Silas had told me that my mother placed a digital shield around me. Any purchase of a plane ticket to a high-risk country like Mexico should have triggered an alert to the trustees. Any large withdrawal from my accounts should have frozen the assets. Yet, we had flown to Cancun without a hitch. Julian had drained my accounts effortlessly. Someone had turned off the alarms. I opened the system logs for the past 3 months. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing the same search queries I used to run at Apex Dynamics when looking for corrupted data sectors. I filtered for security overrides, an authorized bypass. The screen is filled with lines of code. Most were standard system updates, but then I saw it. 10 days before our trip, a manual override command. Protocol 7 Alpha Asset Travel Restriction, disabled. I stared at the screen. The command had been executed from this very terminal. The user ID associated with the override was not a generic admin code. It was a specific, high-level clearance key. Key ID Majordomo 01. Arthur. My stomach dropped. I felt bile rise in my throat. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to close the laptop and pretend I hadn't seen it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Julian had hacked Arthur's account. But I was a data analyst. I knew that numbers did not lie. Only people did. I kept digging. I pulled the communication logs from the house's encrypted line. I searched for outgoing calls to Nevada. There it was, a 20-minute call to a burner phone registered in Las Vegas, made 3 days before Julian proposed to me, and another call, made the night before we flew to Mexico, confirming the flight number. I sat back in the leather chair, the room spinning around me. The tea on the desk suddenly looked like poison. Arthur, the man who had raised me, the man who had wiped my tears. He had not just let this happen. He had orchestrated it. He had fed Julian the idea. He had disabled the shields. He had practically packed my bags and held the door open for the wolf. Why? I needed to know why before I destroyed him. I closed the logs and took a deep breath. I needed to act. I needed to be the actress my mother apparently was. I pressed the intercom button on the desk. "Arthur," I called out, keeping my voice steady and light. "Yes, my dear," came the crackly reply from the kitchen. "I am feeling a bit better. I think I would like to have that celebratory dinner now. And Arthur, open the 1982 Chateau Margaux, the one Mom was saving for my wedding. I think this occasion is close enough." I heard a pause, then a warm chuckle. "An excellent choice. Layla, I will decant it immediately." I spent the next hour preparing. I did not dress for comfort. I dressed for a funeral. I put on a long silk dress the color of dried blood. I went to the safe in the wall, which opened only to my pendant, and removed a small vial of clear liquid. It was a synthetic truth serum my mother had kept in her inventory. A compound called Veritas 4. It was tasteless, odorless, and acted within 10 minutes. I also took a small, pearl-handled pistol. I strapped it to my thigh, hidden beneath the silk of my dress. When I walked into the dining room, the table was set with silver and crystal. Candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Arthur was standing by the sideboard, pouring the dark red wine into 2 glasses. He looked up and smiled. "You look stunning, Layla," he said, "just like Eleanor at the Vienna ball." "Thank you, Arthur," I said, walking over to the table. "I feel awake, for the first time in years." I sat down. Arthur brought the glasses over. He placed one in front of me and kept one for himself. "To your safe return," he said, raising his glass. I reached out, my hand brushing against his. "Wait," I said, "my throat is a little dry. Could you get me a glass of water first?" "Of course," he said, turning back to the sideboard. In that split second, with his back turned, I switched the wine glasses. It was a sleight of hand I had seen in movies, a trick I never thought I would use on the man who taught me how to ride a bike. He returned with the water. I took a sip. "To the family," I said, raising the glass that was now laced with the serum, "and to loyalty." "To loyalty," Arthur echoed. He drank. He drained the glass. We began to eat. The conversation was stilted. I talked about the weather in Mexico, omitting the basement. Arthur nodded, making sympathetic noises. 5 minutes passed. Arthur blinked, rubbing his forehead. "Is it warm in here?" he asked, loosening his tie. 10 minutes. Arthur slurred a word. He dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china plate. "Arthur," I asked, leaning forward, "are you all right?" I feel strange." He mumbled. His eyes were losing focus, drifting. His pupils were dilating. The Verita 4 was taking hold. It stripped away the inhibitions, the filters, the lies. It left only the raw, unfiltered truth. "Arthur," I said softly, "look at me." He looked up. His face was slack, his expression vacant. "Who is Julian Sterling to you?" I asked. "Julian," he murmured. "Useful idiot, greedy, weak." "Why did you help him?" I pressed. "Why did you disable the security protocols?" Arthur let out a low, wheezing laugh. It was a sound devoid of his usual warmth. It was ugly and bitter. "To finish what we started," he rasped. "To clean the stain." "Stain?" I asked. "You," he spat out. The word hung in the air. Venomous. "You and that woman, Eleanor." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Arthur, you worked for my mother for 30 years. You raised me. I worked for the position," he said, his voice gaining a strange, hypnotic rhythm. "I watched her. I waited. She stole it." "What did she steal?" "The seal." He shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The sovereign was not meant for a low-born accountant. It belonged to the true bloodline. It belonged to the Sterlings. The name hit me like a physical blow. The Sterlings. Julian's last name. The rival family Silas had mentioned. Arthur leaned forward, his face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. I am Sterling, he hissed, a distant cousin, disgraced, forgotten. I took the job as a servant to infiltrate. I waited 3 decades for her to slip, but she was too perfect, too careful, and then she died, and she left everything to you. A mongrel, a girl with no spine. He laughed again, a wet gurgling sound. I couldn't just kill you. The council would investigate. I needed you to disappear. I needed you to be sold, disgraced. If the heir is sold into slavery, the claim is voided. The Sterlings regain the seat. Julian was just the vessel. I told him what to do. I told him you were worth nothing to me, but worth everything to the market. Tears pricked my eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of fury. So you fed me to the wolves, I whispered. You sat at this table. You ate with me. You smiled at me. And all the while you were planning to sell me. Not sold, Arthur corrected, his head lolling to the side. Erase. We were going to erase you. Layla. And then the Sterlings would rise again. We would take the network. We would rule. He tried to stand up, but his legs gave way. He slumped back into the chair, panting. You feel it too, don't you? He mumbled, looking at my glass. The wine. I put arsenic in the decanter. I looked at my glass. The wine I had not touched. I know. Arthur, I said, I smelled the almonds when you poured it. My mother taught me that too. His eyes widened. He realized then, through the fog of the drug, what had happened. He looked at his empty glass. He gasped. You switched. I stood up. I walked around the table until I was standing behind him. I placed my hands on his shoulders. He flinched, terrified. I am not a mongrel. Arthur, I whispered into his ear. And I am not a girl with no spine. I am the architect's daughter. And I just found a structural weakness in my house. Help. Me, he choked out, clutching his throat. I looked down at him. I could call an ambulance. I could save him. This was the man who had dried my tears when I scraped my knees. This was the only father figure I had ever known. But he was also the man who had sent me to a basement in Mexico. He was the snake in the garden. I leaned down and whispered one last thing to him. The Sterling sent a servant to do a master's job. Tell them I am coming for them next. I stepped back. I watched as the light faded from his eyes. I watched the betrayal die with him. When he was finally still, I walked to the window and looked out at the New York skyline. The city was bright, alive, indifferent. I picked up the phone and dialed Silas. It is done, I said. Did he confess? Silas asked. He confessed everything, I replied. He was Sterling. He was the leak. And Silas. Yes, mistress. Send a cleaning crew to the townhouse, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. And prepare the jet for the morning. We are going to war. I hung up the phone. I looked at the dead man at the dinner table one last time. I felt a piece of my soul wither and die. But in its place, something stronger, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous was growing. The house was clean. Now, it was time to burn the neighbors. The bruises on my arms were turning a kaleidoscope of sickly yellow and violent purple. My knuckles were raw, the skin split and scabbing over from hitting the heavy bag until my hands felt like blocks of lead. I stood in the basement gymnasium of the New York safe house, my chest heaving, sweat dripping from the tip of my nose onto the mat. Again. Silas barked. He was not wearing his suit today. He was in tactical gear, holding a padded strike shield. His face was not the face of a servant. It was the face of a man who had survived the favelas and the cartels. I lunged forward, left jab, right cross, duck, elbow strike. Faster, Silas commanded, blocking my elbow with a grunt. You are analyzing. Layla, stop thinking, react. If you think, you die. The Sterlings will not give you time to calculate the probability of a punch. I gritted my teeth and threw a roundhouse kick. It connected with the pad with a satisfying thud, sending Silas stumbling back a half step. Better, he said, lowering the shield. But you are telegraphing your intent. Your eyes move before your fist does. It had been 3 weeks since Arthur died at the dinner table. 3 weeks of hell. I had not left the townhouse. I had turned it into a fortress and a dojo. My mother had left me an empire, but Silas was teaching me how to keep it. We started at 5 in the morning and ended at midnight. I learned how to strip and reassemble a Glock 19 in under 30 seconds blindfolded. I learned how to identify the exit points in any room within 3 seconds of entering. I learned the pressure points in the human neck that could cause unconsciousness or death. But the most important lesson was psychological. They expect fear. Silas had told me during a session on interrogation techniques, a victim bargains, a victim pleads, a predator does not speak, a predator listens. When you look at them, do not look at their faces. Look through them. Make them wonder if they are already dead. I wiped my face with a towel, the rough fabric scratching my skin. "Do you think they will come tonight?" I asked, taking a sip of water. Silas nodded grimly. "Arthur missed his check-in with the Sterling handler 3 days ago. They know he is compromised. They know you are here. They will not send lawyers this time. Mistress, they will send the cleaners." I walked over to the weapon rack and picked up the handgun. It felt cold and heavy, a tool of finality. "Let them come," I said. "I am tired of waiting." The sun set over Manhattan, casting long, bloody shadows across the park. The townhouse went dark. We cut the main power, leaving only the emergency red running lights on the floor. It was a psychological tactic. Only we knew the layout. They would be fighting ghosts in a maze. I took my position in the master bedroom on the 3rd floor. I was not hiding under the bed. I was sitting in the high-backed armchair facing the door, the gun resting on my lap. On the desk next to me was a tablet connected to the internal sensors I had reconfigured. At 2 in the morning, the first sensor tripped. "Perimeter breach," I whispered into my comms earpiece. "South Garden wall. 3 heat signatures." "Copy." Silas's voice came back, calm and steady. "2 more at the front gate. They are trying the lock." "Let them in," I ordered. "Protocol Spider." I watched on the tablet as the figures moved through the garden. They were professionals, moving with fluid, efficient silence. They wore night vision goggles and carried suppressed submachine guns. They thought they were hunting a civilian girl and an old butler. They breached the back door. The lock clicked open. The moment the first man stepped onto the kitchen hallway, I tapped the command on my tablet. The hallway was rigged, not with explosives that would attract the police, but with high-intensity strobes and sonic emitters. A blinding flash of white light erupted in the hallway, followed instantly by a high-frequency screech that could rupture eardrums. On the screen, I saw the men stumble, clutching their heads, their night vision blinding them in the sudden flare. "Now, Silas," I said. From the shadows of the living room, Silas and his team opened fire. The suppressed shots sounded like polite coughs. "Foot! Foot! Foot!" The 3 men in the hallway dropped before they could even raise their weapons. But the 2 at the front were smarter. They heard the commotion and diverted. They did not come through the door. They grappled up the balcony. I heard the glass shatter in the library on the 2nd floor. "They are bypassing the kill zone," I said, standing up. "They are coming for me." "Hold your position." "Mistress," Silas said, the sound of gunfire intensifying in his background. "I am coming up." "No," I said, checking the magazine of my gun. "Stay there. Secure the ground floor. I will handle the strays." I walked out of the bedroom and into the dark hallway. My heart was hammering, a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. Stop thinking. React. I heard the creak of a floorboard on the stairs. They were coming up. I pressed myself into the alcove of the linen closet. I waited. I could smell them, the scent of gun oil, sweat, and cheap cologne. A shadow detached itself from the darkness of the stairwell. A man, tall and broad, swept the hallway with his weapon. He was checking the rooms one by one. He moved past my alcove. He did not check the small, recessed door. He was focused on the master bedroom at the end of the hall. I stepped out behind him. "Drop it," I said. The man spun around with terrifying speed. He did not hesitate. He raised his weapon to fire. I did not bargain. I did not plead. I squeezed the trigger twice. 2 shots to the chest, the center of mass, just as Silas had taught me. The impact threw him backward. He hit the wall and slid down, his gun clattering to the floor. But I had made a mistake. I had calculated for 2 men, but I had only seen 1. The second man dropped from the ceiling access panel directly above me. He landed on my back, knocking the wind out of me. The gun flew from my hand and skittered across the floor. We crashed to the ground. He was heavy, smelling of stale tobacco. His hands found my throat instantly. He was strong, far stronger than me. The world began to swim in black spots as he squeezed. "Got you, bitch," he hissed, his face inches from mine. The Sterlings send their regards. Panic flared, hot and bright. I clawed at his hands, but his grip was like iron. My vision blurred. I could hear my own pulse roaring in my ears. React. I stopped thrashing. I went limp for a fraction of a second. He relaxed, thinking I was fading. I jammed my thumbs into his eyes. He roared in pain and recoiled, his grip loosening just enough. I bucked my hips, throwing him off balance, and rolled out from under him. I scrambled to my feet. He was already recovering, blinking tears from his eyes, pulling a combat knife from his belt. "You are dead," he growled, lunging at me. He slashed at my face. I dodged backward, feeling the wind of the blade on my cheek. He slashed again, lower. I sucked in my stomach, the tip of the knife slicing through the silk of my dress, but missing my skin. He was fast, but he was angry. Anger makes you sloppy. Silas had taught me that. He lunged for a 3rd time, a committed thrust aimed at my heart. I stepped into his guard. I grabbed his wrist with my left hand and slammed my right palm under his chin. His head snapped back. I twisted his wrist, using his own momentum against him. There was a sickening crunch of bone. He screamed and dropped the knife. I did not stop. I spun behind him, wrapped my arm around his neck, and locked in a chokehold. I squeezed. I put every ounce of my rage, every ounce of my betrayal, every ounce of the pain from the last month into that grip. He struggled. He kicked. He clawed at my arm. But I was the python. I was the stone. His struggles slowed, then stopped. He went heavy in my arms. I held him for 10 seconds longer, just to be sure. Then I let him drop. He hit the floor with a heavy, final thud. I stood there in the dark hallway, panting, my dress torn, my hair wild. I looked at my hands. They were shaking, but not from fear, from power. I had done it. I had looked death in the face and I had spat in its eye. "Mistress." Silas came bounding up the stairs, his weapon raised. He saw the body of the first man. Then he saw me standing over the second. He stopped. He lowered his gun. He looked at the dead assassin, then at me. He saw the bruise forming on my neck. He saw the fire in my eyes. "Are you injured?" he asked, his voice quiet. I touched my throat. It hurt, but I was alive. "No," I said, my voice raspy. "I am fine." Silas walked over to the dead man and checked for a pulse. "Neck broken," he noted, clean, efficient. He stood up and looked at me with a new expression. It was no longer the look of a mentor teaching a student. It was the look of a soldier saluting a commander. "The ground floor is secure," he reported. "We have 1 survivor. He is being questioned in the kitchen." I walked over to where my gun had fallen and picked it up. I checked the safety and tucked it into the waistband of my dress. "Good," I said, "but we are not done." I walked downstairs, Silas following a step behind me. In the foyer, the other guardsmen who had served my mother, men who had been shadows in my life, were gathering. They saw me come down the stairs, blood on my dress, a gun at my waist. They did not look away. One by one, they straightened up. There was no hesitation this time, no questioning glances at Silas. They looked at me. I realized then that my mother had not just left me money. She had left me a cult. These men had been waiting for the phoenix to rise from the ashes, and tonight they had seen the flames. "Clean this up," I ordered, gesturing to the broken glass and the bodies, "and bring the car around." "Where are we going?" Mistress Silas asked. "To the office," I said. "The Sterlings wanted a war. They sent men with guns to my house. That was a mistake. Guns are crude. I have something much more painful in mind." We drove to the secure server facility in downtown Manhattan, a nondescript building that housed the beating heart of the Sovereign's financial network. I sat at the main terminal, the same kind of terminal where I used to spend my days analyzing market trends for Apex Dynamics. But tonight, I was not analyzing, I was weaponizing. I pulled up the portfolio of Sterling Global. It was a massive conglomerate real estate, shipping, pharmaceuticals. It looked invincible. But every giant has a weak spot. Silas stood behind me, watching the screen. "What is the plan?" he asked. "The Sterlings are leveraged," I said, my fingers flying across the keys. They borrowed heavily to finance their acquisition of the port in Hamburg. They used their pharmaceutical division as collateral. I accessed the Sovereign's black reserves, funds that existed only in the deep web, invisible to regulators. "I am going to short their stock," I explained, "and then I am going to release the documents my mother gathered 20 years ago, the documents proving their pharmaceutical division has been falsifying clinical trials for their heart medication." "But that will crash the market," Silas said. I hit the enter key. "Let it burn," I said. On the screen, graphs began to plummet. Red lines cascaded down like waterfalls of blood. In Tokyo, where the markets were just opening, Sterling Global stock went into freefall. Panic selling began. Billions of dollars in value evaporated in minutes. I watched the numbers drop. 50 million, 100 million, 500 million. This was more satisfying than pulling a trigger. This was destroying their legacy. This was taking the food out of their mouths and the roofs over their heads. "Now for the message," I said. I opened a secure channel to the personal email of Victoria Sterling, the matriarch of the family. I knew she would be awake. The alerts from her brokers would be screaming on her phone right now. I attached a single image. It was a photo Silas had taken of me just 10 minutes ago. I was standing in the ruined hallway of my home, the dead assassin at my feet, the phoenix pendant catching the light, my eyes cold and unforgiving. I typed a subject line, "Your delivery was returned," and in the body of the email, I wrote just one sentence: "The fire is coming." I hit send. I swiveled the chair around to face Silas and his men. "The Sterling family is now insolvent," I announced. "Their assets will be frozen by the SEC by morning. Their creditors will be circling like sharks. But a wounded animal is dangerous. They will try to run." I stood up. "We are not going to let them run. We are going to hunt them down. Not as victims, not as targets. We are the Sovereign." The men shouted a confirmation, a guttural sound of loyalty and war. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and red. It looked like the world was on fire. Good. I thought, let it burn. From the ashes, I would build something they could never touch. The training wheels were off. The data analyst was dead. The Queen had arrived. Rain in New York City is not like rain in Chicago. In Chicago, it cleans the streets. In New York, it just makes the grime slicker, turning the sidewalks into mirrors that reflect the neon desperation of the city. I pulled the collar of my trench coat up, checking my reflection in a shop window. The woman staring back was a stranger. Her hair was dyed a severe jet black, cut into a sharp bob that framed a face hardened by betrayal. I looked like a predator, which was fitting, because I was hunting the only thing harder to kill than a cockroach a journalist's integrity. I walked into O'Reilly's, a dive bar in Hell's Kitchen that smelled of stale beer and regret. It was the kind of place where people went to be forgotten, which made it the perfect place to be found. Chloe was sitting in the back booth, nursing a lukewarm gin and tonic. We had been roommates at Columbia. She was the idealist, the one who marched for every cause and ended up working for the New York Chronicle, exposing corruption on a salary that barely covered her rent. I was the pragmatist who went into data analysis. Look where that got me. I slid into the booth opposite her. She looked up, bored, then froze. Her eyes went wide, and she opened her mouth to scream my name. "Do not," I said, my voice low and cutting through the noise of the jukebox. "Layla," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Oh my God, everyone thinks you are dead. Julian said you ran off with a diving instructor in Mexico. He said you had a breakdown." "Julian says a lot of things," I replied, signaling the bartender for water. Most of them are expensive lies. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a heavy, encrypted flash drive. I slid it across the sticky table. It looked innocuous, just a piece of plastic and metal. But inside was enough digital dynamite to level the financial district. "What is this?" Chloe asked, staring at the drive. "Evidence," I said. "That drive contains the unredacted ledgers of Sterling Global. It proves they have been laundering cartel money through their shipping containers for a decade. It proves they falsified the safety data on their new heart valve, killing 300 people in clinical trials. And it proves they bribed 5 senators to keep it quiet." Chloe looked from the drive to me, her journalist instincts warring with her concern for a friend. "Layla, if this is real, this is the story of the century. But why give it to me? Why not the FBI?" "Because the FBI takes years to build a case, and half of them are on the Sterling payroll anyway," I said, leaning in. "I do not want a trial. Chloe, I want an execution. I want this on the front page of the Sunday edition. I want their stock to be worthless before the market opens on Monday." Chloe picked up the drive, her fingers tightening around it. "They will come for me," she said. "I have a team watching you," I assured her. "You will be safe, but you have to run it, all of it." She looked at me, really looked at me, searching for the soft, quiet girl she used to borrow sweaters from. She did not find her. "You have changed," she said softly. "You look dangerous." I stood up, buttoning my coat. "The world is dangerous. Chloe, I just decided to stop being the victim." I left her there, clutching the story that would make her career and destroy my enemies. One pawn moved. Now for the nights. I returned to the safe house, the adrenaline of the meeting fading into a cold resolve. But the atmosphere in the command center was wrong. The usual hum of efficiency was replaced by a tense silence. Silas was standing by the main console, his back rigid. On the screen, 3 sectors of the global map: London, Tokyo, and Moscow were blinking red. "What is happening?" I asked, throwing my coat onto a chair. "We have a fragmentation," Silas said, turning to face me. His face was grim. "The regional overseers in Europe and Asia are refusing to acknowledge your command codes." I walked to the console. The message on the screen was brief and insulting. "We serve the sovereign, not the accountant's daughter. Proof of strength required. Until then, we stand down." It was a mutiny. They saw a 26-year-old girl who had been sold by her fiancé, and they saw weakness. They thought I was a temporary inconvenience, a placeholder until a real leader stepped up. "Who is leading the dissent?" I asked. "Lord Alistair in London," Silas replied. "He controls the European banking channels. He says you are untested. He calls you a tourist." A tourist. The word grated on my nerves like sandpaper. I looked at the map. If I lost London and Tokyo, the sovereign would collapse into civil war. I did not have the manpower to fight a war on 3 continents. I needed to end this tonight. I needed a gesture so bold, so impossible, that they would have no choice but to kneel. "What does Alistair value most?" I asked. "Information," Silas said. "He hoards secrets. He maintains a blacklist of every corrupt official in the European Union. It is his insurance policy." "And where does he keep it?" "He does not keep it," Silas corrected. "He stores it in the most secure digital vault on Earth, the Federal Data Hub in Virginia. He piggybacks his encrypted files onto the U.S. government's own classified servers. He thinks it is untouchable because to touch it, you would have to hack the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA simultaneously." I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that felt tight on my face. "Get the car." "Silas." "Where are we going?" "We are going to Virginia," I said. We are going to steal his insurance policy, and we are going to do it right under the nose of the federal government. The plan was insanity. Silas told me so. He listed the probabilities of success at less than 3%. He told me that if we were caught, we would disappear into a black site prison for the rest of our lives. I told him to drive faster. We parked the mobile command unit, a nondescript delivery van packed with enough servers to run a small country 2 miles from the data hub facility. I did not need to enter the building physically. I just needed to be within range of their local handshake node, a relay station disguised as a power substation. I sat in the back of the van, the blue light of 3 monitors illuminating my face. My fingers flew across the keyboard. This was my world. This was where I was not a victim, not a woman, not a target. Here, I was a god. I am injecting the worm now. I said into the headset, Silas, I need you to trigger the physical diversion at the east gate. Copy. Silas's voice came back. A moment later, an explosion rocked the distance. Silas had detonated a localized EMP charge at the facility's perimeter. It was not enough to damage the servers, but it was enough to trigger a system reboot of the external firewalls. That was my window. 7 seconds. I dove into the code. It was a chaotic storm of encryption and countermeasures. I dodged the hunter-killer bots, wove through the logic gates, and found the hidden partition where Alistair hid his files. Got you, I whispered. I initiated the transfer. The data began to flow. Gigabytes of blackmail material, the dirty laundry of half of Europe's elite, siphoned out of the most secure vault in the world and into my hard drive. Suddenly, the screen flashed red, a countertrace. They had found me. Mistress, we have company. Silas barked over the comms. Federal agents are deploying. 2 minutes out. I needed 1 minute to finish the download. Hold them off, I ordered. I typed furiously, building false trails, bouncing my signal off satellites in Russia and China to confuse the tracers. The download bar crept forward, 80%, 90%. The van shook as a police cruiser sped past, sirens wailing. 95%. Done. Disconnect, I shouted. I yanked the connection cable. The screens went black. Silas burst into the back of the van a second later, throwing the vehicle into gear. We peeled away from the curb just as a swarm of black SUVs descended on the substation. We vanished into the night. Ghosts in the machine. Back in New York, I uploaded a sample of the stolen files to Alistair's personal, secure server in London. I added a message, I have your insurance policy. Fall in line, or I release every name on this list to the public. You have 1 hour. 40 minutes later, the red light over London turned green. Then Tokyo followed. Then Moscow. One by one, the rebellious branches submitted. They realized that the tourist had just pulled off the greatest data heist in history. I had not just beaten them, I had humiliated them. But as I was reviewing the stolen files, something strange happened. My own system flagged a file. It was not part of Alistair's archive. It had been planted on my drive during the transfer. I opened it. It was a simple text file, no larger than a few kilobytes. The header code was written in a syntax I recognized immediately. It was an old, obsolete coding language that my mother had taught me when I was 10 years old, using it to make secret messages for my birthday. The file contained a single line of text. The night is not the king. Check your 6, little bird. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Little bird? That was her nickname for me. Silas walked in, carrying 2 cups of black coffee. He looked exhausted, his tactical vest covered in dust, but his eyes were bright with triumph. They have capitulated. Mistress, he said, setting the coffee down, you are the undisputed head of the sovereign. I did not celebrate. I turned the screen toward him. Look, I said. Silas read the message. He went pale. This signature, he muttered. It is hers. It is Eleanor's ghost protocol. She is alive. Silas, I said, the realization settling in my gut like a heavy stone. She is not just alive. She is watching. She saw us hack the feds. She used the connection to send this. Silas sat down slowly. "It is a test," he said quietly. "She is evaluating you. She wants to see if you are worthy of the chair." "Or she is warning me," I countered. "The knight is not the king." "What does that mean?" "It means the game is not over," Silas said. "It means there is a player on the board we have not identified. Someone above the Sterlings. Someone pulling the strings." We sat there in silence, the steam rising from the coffee cups. The dynamic between us had shifted. In the van, amidst the chaos, the last remnants of the bodyguard in charge relationship had evaporated. We were partners now. We were soldiers in the same trench. He looked at me with a new depth of respect, but also a new kind of tension. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that I was not just Eleanor's daughter. I was something new. I was reckless where she was careful, aggressive where she was subtle. "We need to flush them out," I said. "If my mother is watching, I want to give her a show." Silas nodded. "The Metropolitan Charity Ball is in 2 days," he said. "It is the social event of the season. The Sterlings will be there. It is their last desperate attempt to project stability to their investors." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city that never slept. "Then we will attend," I said. Silas raised an eyebrow. "It is dangerous, Layla. It is a public venue. We cannot bring a team. You will be exposed." "I want to be exposed," I said, turning back to him. "I want them to see me. I want Victoria Sterling to look me in the eye and know that the girl she tried to erase is standing in her ballroom, drinking her champagne, and holding the detonator to her life." I walked over to the closet where the tactical gear was stored, but I pushed past it to the wardrobe where the high-fashion pieces were kept. "Get me a mask." "Silas," I said, "a gold one, a phoenix. If they want a villain, I will play the villain. But when I take the mask off, there will be no one left standing to applaud." The board was set, the pieces were moving, and somewhere in the shadows, my mother was watching, waiting to see if her little bird would fly or fall. I intended to soar, even if I had to burn the whole world down to create the updraft. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of silk, diamonds, and deceit. 500 of New York's most powerful people swirled under the crystal chandeliers, their faces hidden behind masks of velvet and porcelain. It was a masquerade ball, the Sterling family's desperate attempt to show the world that despite the catastrophic crash of their stock prices 48 hours ago, they were still the kings of the jungle. I stood at the top of the marble staircase, looking down at the predators. I was not wearing black tonight, I was wearing gold. My gown was a cascade of liquid metallic fabric that clung to my body like a second skin, catching the light with every breath I took. But it was the mask that drew the eyes. It was a custom-forged piece, a golden phoenix with wings that swept back into my hair. Covering the upper half of my face, it was beautiful, arrogant, and terrifying. Silas stood a step behind me. He was wearing a tuxedo and a simple black domino mask. He looked like a shadow detached from its owner. "Are the jammers in place?" I whispered, barely moving my lips. "The waiters are positioning the final devices now," Silas murmured back. "We have total saturation. The moment you give the signal, the hotel's network belongs to us." I took a deep breath, tasting the expensive perfume and the underlying scent of fear in the room. Victoria Sterling was down there, the woman who had ordered the hit on my house, the woman who had tried to erase my bloodline. "Let us go down," I said. "I want to look her in the eye before I bury her." We descended the stairs. The conversation in the room lulled as heads turned. The golden dress was a statement of war in a room full of polite pastels. I felt the gaze of senators, hedge fund managers, and socialites. They were wondering who I was. Was I a foreign heiress? A movie star? I walked through the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. I did not look at them. I kept my eyes on the dais at the far end of the room, where Victoria Sterling stood. She was an imposing woman, even in her 60s. She wore a mask of white feathers and diamonds, looking like a vulture dressed as a swan. She was holding a champagne flute, laughing with a senator whose re-election campaign she had likely funded with blood money. I stopped 10 feet from her. Victoria sensed the presence. She turned, her eyes narrowing behind her mask. She did not recognize me. To her, Layla Foxworth was a mousy girl in a cheap cardigan, likely dead in a Mexican ditch. She saw only a rival. "Do I know you?" Victoria asked, her voice dripping with icy condescension. "I do not recall inviting anyone quite so ostentatious." I tilted my head, the golden wings of my mask gleaming. "I invited myself. Mrs. Sterling," I said, my voice modulated by a small device in my throat to sound deeper, more resonant. "I heard you were celebrating." "We are celebrating resilience," Victoria said, raising her glass. "Sterling Global has weathered storms before. We will weather this market correction too." I smiled beneath my mask. "A correction implies a mistake." I said, "What is happening to your company is not a mistake. It is a liquidation." The music stopped. The people nearby fell silent, sensing the violence in the air. Victoria stiffened. "Security," she snapped, waving a hand. "Escort this woman out." 2 large men in tuxedos moved toward me. Silas stepped forward, intercepting them. He did not draw a weapon. He simply moved with a speed that blurred the eye, striking one in the throat and the other in the knee. They collapsed without a sound. The crowd gasped. A ripple of panic started to spread. "Now, Silas," I commanded. I raised my left hand, where a small control unit was concealed in a bracelet. I pressed the stud. The lights in the ballroom died. Screams erupted from the darkness. Then, the massive projection screens on the walls, which had been displaying photos of the Sterling family's charitable works, blazed to life. But the images were different. The audio boomed through the speakers, drowning out the murmurs of the crowd. Project Lazarus, Phase 3. Clinical Trials. Subject 419, deceased, cause of death, valve failure. On the screens, documents flashed by, autopsy reports, emails from Victoria Sterling authorizing the burial of safety data, bank transfers to the FDA regulators, photos of shipping containers packed with cocaine, stamped with the Sterling Global seal. The light from the screens bathed the crowd in a ghostly blue glow. I saw the senator Victoria had been talking to back away, his face pale. I saw the socialites covering their mouths. "This is a lie," Victoria shrieked, her composure shattering. "Turn it off, cut the power." "I cannot turn it off." "Victoria," I said, my voice amplified by the room's sound system, which I had also hijacked, because the truth does not have an off switch. I reached up and undid the clasp of my mask. The golden phoenix fell away. I stood there, my face bare, the scars of the last month hidden behind makeup, but the fire in my eyes exposed for the world to see. Victoria stared at me. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. "You," she whispered, "you are the accountant, the girl." I stepped closer, the microphone in my bracelet picking up every word. "I am not the accountant," I said, my voice ringing through the hall. "I am Layla Foxworth. I am the daughter of Eleanor Foxworth, the woman you tried to destroy, and I have come to collect a blood debt." The room exploded into chaos. Guests began to run for the exits, their shoes clattering on the hardwood, but the doors were locked. My team had secured the perimeter. Victoria looked around, realizing she was trapped. Her eyes hardened. She pulled a small silver pistol from her clutch purse. "Kill her," she screamed to her remaining guards. "Kill them all." The ballroom turned into a war zone. Sterling guards, emerging from the shadows, opened fire. The glass of the champagne pyramid shattered, raining shards onto the floor. Silas shoved me behind a marble pillar as bullets chipped away the stone. "Team Alpha, engage," Silas roared into his comms. From the balcony above, my waiters pulled submachine guns from their serving trays. They rained fire down on the Sterling guards. It was precise, surgical. They were not shooting the guests. They were neutralizing the threat. I did not hide. I pulled the pearl-handled pistol from my thigh holster. "Cover me," I shouted to Silas. I ran through the crossfire. Bullets whizzed past me, tearing the fabric of my dress. But I did not stop. I had one target. Victoria was running toward the service exit behind the dais. She was abandoning her guests, her friends, and her dignity. She just wanted to survive. I vaulted over the table, landing in front of her. "Going somewhere?" I asked, leveling my gun at her chest. Victoria froze. She looked at the gun, then at me. Her mask had fallen off, revealing a face etched with terror and rage. "You stupid girl," she hissed. "You have no idea what you are doing. You are burning down the house to kill a spider." "I am not burning the house," I said, stepping closer. "I am evicting the squatters." I pistol whipped her, the heavy steel frame connected with her jaw, knocking her to the ground. She sprawled on the stage, looking up at me with hatred. "Sign it," I said. Silas appeared beside me, holding a tablet. On the screen was a transfer deed. It surrendered all sterling assets, the company, the properties, the offshore accounts to the sovereign. Victoria laughed, spitting blood onto the floor. "Never. You can kill me. My lawyers will tie this up in probate for 100 years. "I do not need your lawyers," I said. "I need your biometric print." I grabbed her hand. She struggled, clawing at me, but I slammed her hand down onto the tablet screen. The device beeped. Identity confirmed. Transfer initiated. "It is done," Silas said, checking the readout. "You own it all, mistress." I let go of her hand. Victoria slumped back, defeated. She had lost her empire in the span of 10 minutes. I looked out at the ballroom. The shooting had stopped. My team had the remaining sterling guards on their knees. The guests were cowering under tables, witnessing the violent transfer of power. I turned back to Victoria to deliver the final blow, to tell her that she would spend the rest of her life in a cell. But Victoria was smiling. It was a gruesome, bloody smile. "You think you won," she wheezed. "You think Eleanor didn't tell you why she ran." "She ran to protect me," I said. "She ran because of the failsafe," Victoria whispered. Suddenly, a loud, rhythmic beeping sound cut through the silence. It was coming from the center of the room, from the massive ice sculpture of the Sterling Crest. I spun around. Inside the ice, a red light was blinking. Silas's face went white. "Bomb," he shouted. "Everyone down." "Wait," I said, freezing. The frequency of the beep. "It is not a timer. It is a proximity trigger." I looked at the doors. My team was guarding them. "Who let the ice sculpture in?" I screamed over the noise. Silas tapped his earpiece, listening to a channel I couldn't hear. His expression turned from fear to horror. "Mistress, the delivery was authorized by me." What I stared at him. "My code was used," Silas stammered, "but I did not authorize it. Someone cloned my signal. Someone inside the inner circle. The traitor. The final traitor. The night my mother had warned me about." Victoria began to laugh again, a high manic sound. "We are all going to hell together. Layla, the scorched earth protocol. If I lose the crown, no one wears it." The beeping accelerated. Silas grabbed my arm. "We have to go. We have maybe 60 seconds before detonation. The blast radius will take out the entire block." I looked at the guests. 500 people. Innocent people, mostly. "If we run, they die," I said. "If we stay, we die," Silas yelled, pulling me. I looked at the ice sculpture. I looked at the terrified faces of the crowd. I looked at Victoria, who was ready to die just to spite me. And then I looked at the phoenix pendant hanging around my neck, the key, the master key. My mother was an architect. She built the systems. She built the protocols, even the scorched earth protocol. I shook off Silas's grip. "I am not running," I said. I ran toward the ice sculpture. Layla Silas screamed. I reached the sculpture. The cold radiated off it. I smashed the ice with the butt of my gun, shattering the crest. Inside, a complex device was strapped to a canister of liquid explosive. It was digital. It had a keypad. It was asking for a disarm code. I looked at the display. It was an alphanumeric sequence. I thought of the file I had stolen from the government. I thought of the message. The knight is not the king. This was not just a bomb. It was a test. A final, twisted test from the world my mother had built. I have to choose, I whispered to myself. I could run. Silas had the exit secure. I could live, rich and powerful, while 500 people burned. That is what Sterling would do. That is what a crime lord would do. Or I could stay. I looked at the keypad. I typed in a sequence. Not a code I had learned, but a date. My birthday. The beeping stopped for a microsecond, then it sped up. Incorrect. 30 seconds. Think, Layla. Think like her. She is not sentimental. She is pragmatic. What is the code? I closed my eyes. I pictured my mother at the kitchen table. Numbers tell the truth. Layla. I looked at Victoria. She was watching me, waiting for the fire. I looked at Silas. He had not left. He was standing by the door, gun drawn, refusing to abandon me even if it meant death. Loyalty. I typed in a new word, the name of the only person my mother had ever trusted enough to save. The man she had pulled from the gutter in Rio. Silas. The screen flashed green. System disarmed. Silence rushed back into the room, louder than the explosion would have been. I slumped against the pedestal, the adrenaline crashing out of my system. I looked at the device. It hadn't been set by Victoria. She didn't know the code. It had been set by someone who knew the history of the Sovereign better than I did. I stood up, my legs shaking. I walked back to the dais where Victoria was lying. She looked confused. She had expected fire. She was silent. "Get her out of here," I said to the guards. "Hand her to the FBI. The evidence is already on their servers." I turned to Silas. He walked toward me, his face pale. "You stayed," he whispered. I looked at him, and then I looked at the crowd, who were slowly realizing they were alive. "I am not a king. Silas," I said, touching the pendant. "Kings sacrifice their pawns. I am a queen. I protect the board." But as we walked out of the ballroom, leaving the ruins of the Sterling Empire behind us, my phone buzzed. A single message. "Checkmate, Victoria. Now, let us play the real game." I looked up at the balcony. In the shadows of the rafters, high above the chaos, a figure was watching. A figure in a gray business suit, holding a parasol. She was gone before I could blink. The traitor wasn't a traitor. The bomb wasn't meant to kill me. It was the graduation ceremony, and I had just passed. But the diploma came with a threat. The Sovereign was mine, but the war for my soul had just begun. The silence that followed the disarming of the bomb was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and loaded with unspoken questions. The FBI had swarmed the ballroom within 10 minutes, taking Victoria Sterling away in handcuffs. She had been screaming, not about her crimes, but about the impossibility of my survival. As they dragged her out, the guests were evacuated, leaving me alone in the wreckage of the gala with Silas and the silent, blinking remains of the ice sculpture. Silas moved to secure the perimeter, but I remained focused on the device. My heart rate had returned to a steady, rhythmic beat, a cold metronome in my chest. I ran my fingers over the keypad I had just used. The code had worked, but something about the mechanism bothered me. It was too sophisticated for Victoria. Who hired thugs with baseball bats? It was too elegant for a simple act of terrorism. I knelt in the puddle of melted ice and examined the casing. There, hidden beneath the digital display, was a secondary panel. It was a pattern of colored wires woven into a complex knot. To an expert bomb tech, it would look like a random tangle. To me, it was a message. It was the Gordian knot of the Sovereign. My mother used to make me untangle yarn when I was 7 years old. She called it a game. Pull the red. Layla, now loop the blue. If you pull the black, the whole thing tightens. It was not a game. It was a schematic. I reached in, my fingers moving with a muscle memory I did not know I possessed. I bypassed the red wire. I ignored the blue. I pulled the black loop gently to the left. The casing clicked open. Inside, there was no explosive residue. There was a small, high-frequency transmitter, and wrapped around it was a press badge. I picked it up. The laminate was wet, but the photo was clear. The name printed below it was Chloe Evans. My breath hitched. The world tilted on its axis. Chloe, my roommate, my friend, the woman I had met in a dive bar just 48 hours ago, the woman I had entrusted with the evidence that would bring down the Sterlings. Mistress Silas asked, stepping up behind me. What did you find? I stood up, clutching the badge so tightly the plastic cracked. I found the snake, I said, my voice dead. Bring the car. We are going to the Chronicle. We found Chloe in her office. It was 3 a.m, but she was packing a box. She looked up when I walked in, flanked by Silas and 2 armed guards. She did not look surprised. She looked resigned. Hello? Layla, she said, placing a framed photo of us from graduation into the box. I saw the news. You survived. I walked over to her desk and tossed the wet press badge onto the wood. It landed with a slap. You planted the transmitter, I said. You used the access I gave you to smuggle the signal booster into the ballroom. You allowed the signal to override Silas's controls. Chloe sighed, sitting down in her chair. She looked tired. I did not plant the bomb, Layla. I just opened the door for the person who did. Why, I asked. The word felt inadequate. It felt small against the magnitude of her betrayal. We were friends. I gave you the story of a lifetime. I made you a star. Because you have everything, Chloe shouted, standing up, her face flushed with a sudden, ugly anger. Look at you. You were the quiet, mousy girl I felt sorry for in college. And now you are a queen. You have billions of dollars. You have a private army. You have an empire. And what do I have? A byline. A pat on the head. She laughed bitterly. The Vipers offered me $5 million just to plant a bug. $5 million. Layla, that is life-changing money. That is freedom. All I had to do was betray a friend who had already outgrown me. I looked at her. I looked at the jealousy that had rotted her from the inside out. I realized then the true isolation of power. The higher you climb, the thinner the air becomes, and the harder it is to tell who is breathing it with you and who is trying to steal your oxygen. Silas stepped forward, his hand moving to his weapon. Shall I handle this, mistress? He asked, cold and professional. Chloe flinched, fear finally breaking through her resentment. No, I said. I walked around the desk and stood in front of her. Killing her would be a mercy, I said, and I am not feeling merciful today. I picked up the phone on her desk and dialed the number of the FBI director, a contact Silas had provided. Director, I said when he answered, this is Layla Foxworth. I have the second co-conspirator in the Sterling terrorism case. She is in the offices of the New York Chronicle. And the director. She has evidence of federal crimes on her hard drive. I hung up and looked at Chloe. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face. You will not go to a black site, I told her. You will go to a federal prison. You will be stripped of your press credentials. Your name will be synonymous with treason. You wanted to be famous. Chloe, now you will be infamous. I turned and walked away. Layla. She screamed after me. You cannot leave me like this. We are friends. I paused at the door. Layla Foxworth had friends, I said without looking back. The sovereign has only subjects and enemies. You chose your side. I left her to the sirens wailing in the distance. We returned to the townhouse as the sun was beginning to rise over the East River. I felt hollowed out. I had won. But the victory tasted like ash. I had destroyed the Sterlings, purged the traitors, and secured the throne, but I had lost the last tether to my humanity. I went to the library and sat at the heavy oak desk. I rested my head in my hands, closing my eyes. Mistress. Silas was standing in the doorway. He was holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. The wax seal on the back was unbroken. It was stamped with the image of a phoenix. This was delivered to the front gate 5 minutes ago, Silas said softly. The courier vanished before we could detain him. I took the envelope. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy parchment. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and unmistakably familiar. It was the handwriting that had signed my report cards, written my grocery lists, and labeled the jars of jam in our pantry. My dearest little bird, if you are reading this, then you have survived the fire. You have solved the Gordian knot. You have removed the weeds from the garden. I know you are angry. You have every right to be. I lied to you. I hid you. I made you feel small so that you would never be a target. But I also taught you every puzzle, every game, every lesson in patience was a brick in the fortress I was building inside your mind. I knew this day would come. The world is a cruel place for women who refuse to kneel. I could not protect you forever. I had to make sure that when the time came, you could protect yourself. You are wondering why I am not there. You are wondering why I do not come out of the shadows and hug you. It is because a queen cannot have a mother. She can only have a predecessor. If I return, you will always be the daughter. You will always be looking to me for approval. You must stand alone. You must be the sun in your own solar system. Do not mourn the girl you were. She was a cocoon. You are the weapon I forged in silence. You are the strongest thing I ever created. Rule well, Layla. And remember, the phoenix does not mourn the ash. It uses it to rise. With love and infinite pride. The Architect. I let the letter fall to the desk. A single tear tracked down my cheek. Hot and stinging. It was the last tear I would ever shed for the past. She was right. The girl who wanted a simple life, a husband, and a home was dead. She had died in a basement in Mexico. The woman sitting in this chair was something else entirely. I stood up and walked to the wall safely. I opened it and took out the master ledger of the sovereign. "Silas," I called out. He appeared instantly. "Yes, chairwoman." "Prepare the jet," I said. "We are going to Zurich. I need to meet with the European Council. It is time they met the new administration in person." Silas smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. "At once, chairwoman." 6 months later, I stood on the observation deck of the Sovereign Tower, the tallest building in Manhattan, a structure that did not officially exist on any city planning map. The wind whipped at my coat, 70 stories above the streets where I used to walk as a ghost. Below me, the city was a grid of lights, a circuit board that I now controlled. Sterling Global had been dismantled, its assets absorbed into my network. Julian was serving a 20-year sentence in a maximum security prison in Nevada, protected by no one, owning nothing. Victoria had suffered a stroke during her arraignment and was living out her days in a state facility, unable to speak, trapped in her own mind. Chloe was awaiting trial, her name a cautionary tale in journalism schools across the country. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I reached up and touched the pendant around my neck. The silver was cold, hard, and eternal. I had been sold for $500,000. I had been betrayed by my fiancé, my guardian, and my best friend. I had been stripped of my identity and my dignity. But they had made a fatal error. They thought they were burying me. They did not know they were planting a seed. I looked out at the horizon, where the first light of dawn was breaking. The world was vast, dangerous, and beautiful, and it was mine. "I am Layla Foxworth," I whispered to the wind, "and I am done hiding." I turned away from the edge and walked back toward the glass doors where my team was waiting. The meeting was about to begin. The work never ended. The phoenix had risen, and now it was time to fly. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am curious to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below with your city or country and let us share our thoughts on Layla's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of betrayal and power, please make sure to subscribe to the Scarlet Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can get this story heard by even more people.